Hello and thank you for joining WorkFusion's AML Cost Takeout Summit. For this next segment, I am honored to be joined by two pioneers who have been applying automation to some of AML and KYC's most sticky problems. Despite settling on the same problems to solve, these gentlemen come from two very different organizations, the Bank of Nova Scotia and the National Bank of Pakistan. The Bank of Nova Scotia, also known as Scotiabank, is a global organization and one of the largest financial institutions in Canada. Conversely, the National Bank of Pakistan is a government-owned multinational commercial bank with a relatively small footprint in the Americas. These gentlemen also come from two very different perspectives. One whose remit is to drive automation across the bank and has over 20 years of experience running digital ventures. And the other whose job is to actually lead the bank and brings with him over 30 years of experience working in different compliance organizations. Two different banks, two different perspectives, and one riveting conversation. Before I formally introduce our two guests, please allow me to introduce myself. My name is Brian Briggs, and for the past 5 years, I have been advising banking and insurance executives on how to scale intelligent automation across their respective organizations. Today, I will be your host. Now, for our first guest, Andrew Szabo. Andrew leads automation at the Bank of Nova Scotia, which includes workforce management, business process management, robotic desktop and process automation, as well as machine learning and artificial intelligence automation. Prior to Scotiabank, Mr. Szabo spent 20 years in both management consulting and running large-scale enterprise businesses. At Microsoft, Mr. Szabo ran several business units, including the firm's Canadian Consulting Group and the Enterprise Partner Group focusing on cloud and distributed computing from strategy and design, architecture, implementation, and sustainment. At Deloitte, Mr. Szabo was primarily responsible for the design and scaling of the firm's digital offerings, working with banking, utilities, government, defense, insurance, and resource companies to define and deliver digital IT and operational strategies, as well as running large-scale and complex system implementations globally. Mr. Szabo holds an MBA from the University of Toronto's Rotman School of Management. And for our second guest, Jim Stubbs, who is CEO for the National Bank of Pakistan Americas. Jim is a 30-plus year compliance industry veteran and the former Deputy Global Head of Anti-Money Laundering at Citigroup and former Chief Compliance and Ethics Officer at American Express Bank, the former international banking subsidiary of American Express Company. We're lucky to have them both here today, and now let's get started. I think one of the things that struck me about both of your institutions is that you kicked off your automation journeys with AML and KYC processes. And I'm just hoping maybe you could tell us, why you chose to do that and why this was the right place to start. Andrew, I see you're nodding your head. Maybe why don't you go first, and then we'll kick it over to Jim.
Yeah, absolutely. So for a bit of context, our automation journey is about 3.5 years old at the bank, and 3.5 years ago we had just a handful of people who were trying to figure out what RDA, RPA, machine learning, artificial intelligence is. We're trying to put together a couple of use cases that were interesting. We're building automations, but the speed with which we were building these was pretty slow. Like, admittedly, it's much slower than we wanted to have it. It would usually take us about 4 months to build an automation. It would cost an awful lot of money. And it was just not a fun process. Very quickly, we pivoted to thinking about, instead of having this as a science experiment, like trying to just play with technology, and turn it into how do we actually generate value for our stakeholders. So freeing up people's time, driving revenue, reducing other technology costs and so forth. So once we took that lens on it, AML became fairly interesting to us. And one of the reasons, we didn't quite start with AML, but it was one of the first sort of tranches for us for sure. One of the reasons we started there is because the way we were solving problems in AML is we were throwing people at the problem. So if we had a giant case volume of entity searches, for example, we would just hire 500 people, like in 2, 3 weeks to do that work. And that wasn't really sustainable. So at that point, we had a number of discussions with our senior leadership who agreed that this would be a very interesting thing to look at. And we started building automations. And at first they were very, very small, but it's incredible how meaningful they are when a regulator looks at your record, right? And automations gave us the ability to have a fully auditable process where we record every single step. It gave us an opportunity to deliver massive, massive time benefit back to the teams that were doing the work. So quite often in our cases in AML, we would deliver a product that can do, let's say, an entity search in seconds versus hours. And if you think about the hundreds of thousands of cases that need to go through the system every hour or every couple of hours, like this is a meaningful and large contribution back to the team. So AML kind of became for us one of those kind of leading indicators as to what automation can do at the bank. And we delivered a bunch of RPA and some RDA components there, and they were wildly successful. And it was, frankly, for us, it was simply that. We were doing something that was kind of cool and not bleeding edge because automation's been around forever. But it was kind of neat to do, and it delivered a lot of value for not a lot of investment. What's interesting for us, and I'll share this with you. I know this is kind of going on broadly, but in the first year, for every dollar that the bank invested in us, we would return like a $1.50 back to the bank. And man, were we proud of that, right? And now we're kind of getting to the order of magnitude conversation where for every dollar invested in us, we return $5, $6, $8, $10 back to the bank. And it's largely on the backs of these large AML builds that we started with. So that was a really good way to cut our teeth. It was meaningful. The regulator loved it, audit loved it, and our clients, our internal clients, got a tremendous amount of benefit from doing that work.
Yeah, fantastic. And so it really sounds like it was kind of wins across the board when it came to automating in the AML KYC space. Jim, was it similar at National Bank of Pakistan, or kind of what drove you to start in the AML and KYC space?
I think that a lot of the benefits are similar. A lot of the circumstances are similar, and I think frankly, I've been looking at technology opportunities for many years, and coming from different institutions, right? And I think the point of AML, particularly transaction monitoring, alert analysis, and investigation, is an area where the industry absolutely recognizes it's become one of body count and incredibly expensive operations there. And unfortunately, frankly, in addition to the cost associated with that, a lot of the work is not very satisfying. A lot of the work is redundant. It's exacting. It's it's repetitious. And so it lends itself, I think we felt like it lent itself well to automation. Right? You could prescribe the procedures that could be employed to perform the task. It's consistent, reliable, and as I say, very importantly, it reduces the work that's done by the people there. The idea is to help them focus on value-added work, help them exercise judgment, and do the things that really excite people about doing a task, right? And I think that's part of the objective that we have, both cutting costs and increasing employee satisfaction. I think that the fact is, though, this is, you mentioned that you've made a lot of progress and a lot of, Andrew, you've returned a lot of value to the institution. That's terrific. And I think, for better or for worse, for you, it's a good it's a target-rich environment in AML because so much of it has grown up in a manual environment. So much of it has grown up in a disjointed way, kind of appending one thing to the next as opposed to a master design that works seamlessly. So again, I look at automation as an opportunity to take a step back, to redesign the process, to decide what works. We have now, highly prescribed requirements that we've demonstrated that work. That the regulators have given us feedback are required or necessary, and so now there are more specific specs you can build to and measure and see where you're going with this. So I think there are a lot of elements that lend itself to automation. So keep the dialogue going. I'll pause there
And Jim, if I may add to what you said, because you said something super important, and I was so focused on sort of the high-level, board-level messaging that we always get caught up every week on. But you said something that is just so important, which is, you're removing manual work from people, and it's boring and rote and quite often terrible in this space. What was a big surprise to us is, and this is everywhere, and I mean, we are. My group gets to go in every geography of the bank and in every function of the bank. So we see this everywhere. The clamor and the noise to automate usually comes from the frontline workers who are like, please take this terrible process away from me. I don't want to get carpal tunnel on this. And the reticence on these processes usually comes from middle management. It's the directors and some of the VPs who are like, well, I either don't know the process or I don't want this taken away from us. But it's really amazing what the frontline does. And I think we owe it to our constituents internally to make their lives better and to create better jobs as well. And I think, that's quite often missing from the automation conversation around how do we delight our customers, which are quite often our employees, who are doing this work, and free them up to do better stuff. And we certainly see that to be the case. So I think, Jim, I think that's a very important point that sort of we need to double down on.
Yeah. And I mean, the fact is, though, as you said, it's also got to pay for itself. And now, with having a foot in each world, with my history in compliance and my current tasks of being primarily responsible for the financial results of the firm, I recognize the employee satisfaction that comes from that, absolutely. But I also realize that it can't be a hobby, right? And we all do. Right? It can't be something that we do. But I will admit, one of the motivations for this is that remediating a program and building and enhancing a program can be thankless at times, or feel thankless at times. And part of what I wanted to do also was motivate the compliance staff to say, look, I want you to be thinking innovatively, and I'm willing to invest in an opportunity for you to demonstrate that innovative thinking, and for you to use your imagination, for you to talk to vendors with really smart people who are already thinking about this, to join user groups, to leverage that thought process. So again, I think it's a win-win all the way around with regard to enhancing employee satisfaction. And then, hopefully, like I say, it pays for itself, and your 5-to-1, 10-to-1 ratio is fantastic. I'd love to hear more about that. So yeah, I think
it's a lot of work, but we could certainly chat.
Just to maybe emphasize why AML and EDD or KYC. Here as I mentioned, we have well established prescribed procedures there. So the elements are defined. We know what they're, and a lot of those elements are an aggregation activity. They're a data population activity. And it's not necessarily a processing activity in the first phase. And I think both of those procedures in compliance are high volume, repetitious, well prescribed activities. And so again, even as a non-technical person, I can readily visualize, or see that the automation can play a role there, and it's accessible to me. I don't have to simply go on faith, and particularly working with new teams and things like that, that ability to see to the end and to see the value that could be created just gives me more confidence to put my neck out and ask for the investment dollars, and to push forward a little bit into the unknown.
Yeah, excellent. It really sounds like both of your organizations were kind of at a tipping point where, Andrew mentioned getting to the point where you were having to add, potentially hundreds of people to take care of a specific problem within a specific time frame. Jim, you talked about kind of the need coming from the employees themselves, obviously, and then just the kind of target-rich opportunity in terms of the type of work that the people were doing. But I'm curious if you have a sense of why now these things were kind of bubbling up and boiling over, and kind of what made you really start looking for a solution, and how did you determine kind of what to do once you found it?
Well, I'll go ahead, Andrew, quickly, and I'll try and make it quick because I'll probably say a few things where you're much more expert. And that would say, from my standpoint, there are a few things. One, the cost had gotten so high that we needed to bend the curve. We needed some other kind of solution to this. Then you couple that with the fact that data was becoming much more readily available. The processing speed was was there. The memory was there. All of these things, which maybe hypothetically were there or theoretically were there, but they were now becoming more affordable. And so people had breakthroughs or were delivering ideas on these here. So I was able to see, again, for years and years, I've had people bring me, the world's greatest, I don't know what, white bread slicer, right? And and I wasn't convinced, right? But I started increasingly, as I mentioned, I kind of need to see the end and to be confident that it's going to be successful, so that I can stick my neck out. And I saw a lot of those elements coming together. And Andrew, as I say, I'm sure you can add a lot to that.
Jim, I think you absolutely nailed it. I mean, we were getting to the point where we're running out of seats in our buildings. Like, we had to buy new buildings to put people into that could handle this work. I think that was the biggest drive for it. And in Canada and a lot of other jurisdictions that we work in, the regulatory landscape was changing very rapidly when we started this journey with AML and EDDU and KYC. And what was being apparent that the work that they were asking us to do to verify transactions and to verify people was far more onerous than before. And I think, Jim, you said it very aptly. We had to, the data was there and we had to do it well. We had to eliminate in sort of our case a lot of the rework that happened, because there's a lot of mistakes that happen throughout these processes. And we needed something, as I said earlier, that we could audit and we could see every step that was taken, and we wanted to be first time right on as much as I hate that phrase, we wanted to be first time right on a lot of this work. And we were getting to the point where hundreds of thousands of cases were piling up that we had to get done in a certain time frame because the regulator demanded that be done. And frankly, we ran out of avenues. Like, automation was one of those things that could handle it quickly. And we'll probably talk about this later, or maybe not. But I think one of the beautiful things about automation is it's generally relatively low cost. Especially we're very lucky in our environment. We built a large team around this. We're global, so we leverage a lot of capabilities, and we can drive costs down that way. And we have a large capability in terms of people capability, so we can do a lot of things that others can't necessarily do. But we could leverage that quickly, and we could deploy it in a short amount of time frame. And if someone from enterprise technology built something bigger and better that was a giant enterprise solution, we could turn our stuff off and move on to the next thing. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about automation in a banking environment, because you can be very tactical about what problems you solve, for how long you want to solve them for. Having said that, I think it's interesting in our case. When we started out, we said, hey, we'll probably have automation for a process running for 6 months to a year. We now have automations that are running for 3 years. We take them in every year, we improve them, and they're just a permanent part of how we solve problems at the bank now. So there's a lot of flexibility, I think, built in naturally. But again, for us, it was a cost driver, not being able to hire people, and a kind of a data and accuracy question.
Yeah. And I'd just add briefly to that you talked about the error rate and things like that. Again, when you're talking about high volume operations, when you're talking about 500 people, you have training for 500 people, you have QA for 500 people, you have monitoring, testing, audit, the whole life cycle of what it takes to deliver and demonstrate that you have a control process that's working. It's well beyond the actual processing itself. And so maybe your team's already adding these things into your risk assessment, but your cost benefit assessment. But that's another thing, that I keep saying too, is that it reduces regulatory risk. Once we will come to this, I'm sure, once you are able to demonstrate that it works, right, then you're reducing regulatory risk, you're delivering consistent results, and you obviously need the tests and monitoring on the technology, but those are, that's a more standard process than monitoring and assessing 500 individuals, any one of whom, could be having bad days.
Exactly, Jim. And to your point, I mean, just fine avoidance, like being late on a case or being wrong on a case, there's massive fines that banks have to pay to get out of that trouble, or just part of the penalty process. And automation allows us to essentially just get rid of that entirely as a risk. And by nature, Jim, your organization and my organization, we are just a giant risk reduction machine. That's all we do. And, automation just provides that extra margin for us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thanks, guys. It really does sound like a confluence of factors were occurring, right? You had more regulations, you had rising costs, technology was coming to the point where it could start to solve the problem, and it just was kind of perfect timing. I did want to double click on it, as Jim was saying, the regulatory aspect. As you've interfaced with the regulators, what's some of the feedback that you're getting from them? Do you have to convince them that automation is the right way to go and that automation is safe? What's some of the feedback that you're getting, and what have those interactions been like to date?
You want to go first, Andrew?
I was going to say, you're the regulatory guy. I'll let you lead. But my 2 cents on this, and then you can give a fulsome answer, is I find that our local regulators here in Canada have been very open to it. In fact, they very much have embraced automation because, frankly, they can see things better. There's a higher degree of certainty when we're exchanging information with them as well. So as far as we have seen in Canada, and again in the Americas, because we're everywhere, it's been an easy journey. Even in Colombia and Mexico and the Caribbean and other places where we've been deploying these AML solutions, the regulator has been very happy that we are doing so. I think it's almost like just a reassuring bit of information that we are paying enough attention to this function and we care about it enough to invest in it, because quite often these control functions have not seen the largest investments in the past. They were kind of like, we just have to check this box as well. And I think when you're saying, I have a robust way of thinking about how to automate this function, I think regulators feel that, one, you have control over it, and two, you're investing in it and you care about it. And so that's what I've seen.
Yeah, I agree completely with that. And, I'd say my fairly recent experience, really runs the gamut from a small bank with National Bank of Pakistan to a large bank like Citigroup. And, in both cases, in each case, across the board, automation is essential. And you obviously, so you certainly can't run Citigroup without extensive automation. You can't even run National Bank of Pakistan, US, without it, right? And this is a bank that is, relatively small. It is small, probably by any measure, right? And yet, banking is it's an automated business, has to be. So I found that the regulators, for the reasons that Andrew mentioned, are all for it, and in fact are demanding it. And and the regulators, look, they have terrific expertise also in now in auditing and examining, the automation that's implemented. They have specialty groups that really add value to the process. And so, I've again, I think it works very well together. And while I think I will say it's not without some hiccups or without some hesitations, because I do believe that change within automated environments, or change within environments period, is one that regulators scrutinize very carefully. Right? They want to be sure that you're doing it responsibly. They want to be sure that you're doing it for the right reasons and that you're doing it appropriately. Right? And so there's a high bar to demonstrate that. I'd also say there sometimes seems to, there can be at least a perception, if not reality. I think there's some reality there too. Of it's an additive process. The regulators are looking at additive processes where we're looking for where we believe that it's appropriate to substitute certain processes. And I think we're getting there. I think as we demonstrate and follow through on our use cases and are able to demonstrate the value add through the new systems, the regulators I've dealt with have always listened. They've said, show me, right? But they're willing to look and examine and to analyze. And I think that's all we can do as professionals. And I'm confident that we have to take on that challenge, and I think that the regulators are absolutely meeting us more than halfway. So I'm not. That's not a barrier, in my opinion, to moving forward with automation.
And Jim, you said something. No, I don't think it is either. I mean, if you sort of read the popular press on it, sort of audit type functions are embracing automation at a record pace. I mean, we had a couple of calls with our internal audit group that looks at a lot of our work, for example, and they've been so happy with sort of what we're delivering everywhere else. They're asking us how do they deliver automated audits of X, Y, and Z. And that's true for internal, and that's true for external auditors and regulators as well. So I think they'll see it more in their world, and they'll demand it. I think my answer was more neutral, but I think you're absolutely right. They are demanding it now because they want to see volume. They want to see us resolve cases faster, and you can't do it without automation.
Excellent. Thanks both. So we've only got a few minutes left. I'd like to close with maybe getting some of your insights. If you had any words of wisdom to share with some of the other AML and thought leaders, watching today, what would you say that you've learned, and what would you want to kind of share with them that you maybe didn't know at the start of this, or kind of surprised you along the journey?
Jim, you want to start with this one?
I'll start, and I'll give you the last word. So I think, I see a lot of promise for automation and for vendor solutions here, as well as internally developed solutions, by the way. I think that it's important to understand what you're doing and to not hand your business over to a third party, right? I think that's an obvious thing. But I've seen a number of circumstances where regardless of motivation, the result is somehow there's too much dependence placed on a third party, and the ownership isn't retained somehow. And so I think you have to make sure that you're in a position to retain sufficient ownership before you get into this. Right? So, I think that's a learning that you can't, you have to scrutinize the sales pitches, if you will. You have to scrutinize and make your own. You have to have your own understanding of the value proposition, because something that's wildly successful for Scotiabank may not be for National Bank of Pakistan. It may be at the wrong scale. It may be a different business risk or compliance risk. It may not just work, right? But so you need to be very careful about assessing for yourself what the third parties or what others are telling you, and be maybe this is my conservatism in this way, but I want to be able to visualize success and understand that process before I get in with both feet. And then the other thing I just mentioned is, all along the way, it's a pain, but it really pays off. It's essential that you document that process, the reasons for what you're doing, all of this. And this is not a protective or defensive exercise. This is a way of leaving trails for yourself and for other areas of the industry and the institution to understand where you've been, to help you improve it, to find your way out if you find yourself in a dark corner. Just all kinds of benefits to making that investment in thorough documentation of what you're doing, how you're doing it, where you're going.
And I was going to have a completely different answer, but for the third time on this call, I'll say Jim is absolutely right. So I'll go down a different avenue than I was going to. I think ownership is super important, to your point, Jim. As much as people outside the organization will purport to care about your outcomes, no one will care about your outcomes as much as you. You have to own this, and you have to be accountable for it. Ideally, and this is where we have seen a lot of success, we are the drivers internally of our own success, and we own these processes end to end. And some of that stuff is a lot. They're very large programs, not just projects. But I think ownership and knowledge and retaining that knowledge internally from the process to the technical side is super important. There are lots of tools out there. There are lots of vendors that will tell you they have everything under the sun that they can build and cover. But I think at the end of the day, you need to be accountable for your own success. So if you want to build an automation program that can deliver well, I would say start from the value equation. What is this going to deliver? Is this process worthy to automate from that perspective? Will it generate revenues for you? Will it save money in your front or save time with your frontline? Will it generate goodwill with your frontline teams, as we talked about before, and a number of other factors you can throw in? Will it save money? Once you're comfortable with that, then you need to be very tight with the execution. What we have found is, as I mentioned early on in the call, we would take sometimes 4 months to deliver a project. We are now at the point where we're delivering 1 to 2 automations every day, complex automations, some of them taking as little as a week to build, because we have built that competency internally. So where you have the luxury to do so, build it inside, build that team that can manage the intake, the build, and I think most importantly, the support of these automations. Because quite often we sort of pat ourselves on the back when we deliver something, and then a system changes in the background and the whole thing falls on its face 2 months later. You have to be cognizant of that. You have to think about this in a life cycle approach. But yeah, I think, Jim, ownership. I think ownership is the most important aspect of it, and having an executive in your organization that can be accountable for those outcomes. And what you will find, I think similar to what we have found over the past 3.5 years, is, you know, at the very beginning, we had to go out and sort of seek out projects and really convince people that we can deliver for them. Whereas for the past 2.5 years, we had to like hold the door shut because there's such a volume of people in the bank coming to try to sell us their project that we can deliver for them. And I think you know, if you have an executive that's accountable, you'll find a lot of success.
Those are all great answers. I really like the retain the expertise focus, and then the emphasis on accountability, execution, documentation, selecting the right projects, and kind of doing that value analysis up front. So I think these were terrific answers. I'm sure the audience will benefit greatly from them. And just want to say thanks to both of you for your time today, for sharing your expertise, and for talking a little bit more about the automations that you're embarking on, your organizations.
Great. Thank you. Good to meet both of you.
Thank you.